China's economy is slowing, iPhone production is shutting down, Australian workers are protesting. If you think the world is falling apart, yes, yes, it is. Hey everyone, this is Chris. Welcome back to the channel. This is your daily Uncut News. So, I want to start with this. We talked this for a while, but basically, China's economy is slowing, as you guys know, and we're starting to see the ripple effects into particular companies. In fact, the first one I'll point out to you guys is Apple, and this is obviously a major company in our market, a company in almost every market that everyone knows. And as it turns out, their demand is slowing. So basically, this past week, so this is the week of October 24th, iPhone sales were down 27%, and this is like 3 weeks in a row where the sales have been down. Now, the quarter before, iPhone sales were up 5.7%. However, Android sales were down 15.52%. So basically, what I'm telling you guys is that like Android sales were down, Apple sales were holding okay, but just last month, Apple sales have really, and iPhone is what we're talking about, has really, really taken a dive in China. And this matters quite a bit because for companies who want to make money, China is usually a important market, but the growth in China is slowing. So we're talking about worrying about global recession, not just in USA, but globally. And as it turns out, too, COVID is still a problem. Foxconn, where they make iPhones, and they do it in multiple factories, but this particular one is in Zhengzhou. I actually used to live in Shenzhen, where there was a Foxconn factory there, but they have another one. It is actually a really big factory, and in fact, 30% production hit is what they'll take. And I was reading about this. Evidently, the workers were locked in their dormitories because it was a lockdown. And I'm sure you guys understand that if there's a COVID outbreak, yes, you want to contain it, but like that's the last place I want to be. I want to go home. And essentially, the workers felt the same way as well. And so I guess they were like climbing over walls and just trying to get out of the factory because it's kind of like a prison in a way. It's hard to explain if you've ever seen pictures of these things, but I feel sorry for the whole situation. Essentially, they saw this before, but basically, China was interested in buying the Moderna vaccine because it works. But China, the government, wanted Moderna's secret formula. And I mean, sure, you guys understand that Moderna just wanted hey, here's our secret formula. No, it's a secret, right? That's the whole point. And they couldn't work out a deal. So the Chinese people had to pay the price, and they still haven't gotten over COVID. Now, I don't know if the strain is as lethal as the first strains, because you guys know this, the strains do change over time, but still, it is still a real thing there, and it is shutting down the economy, and also too, the government's being really, really strict on their lockdowns. Related to Apple, but not China, is actually in Australia. Workers are going on strike, and evidently it's actually widespread. Now there are about 4,000 workers in Australia, and basically they voted it down. See, what was it here? It says hundreds of Apple workers in Australia set to strike again. Almost 2/3 of employees rejected a pay and benefits deal. And if anyone is watching this in Australia, I'd love to hear about this. I did not know that the workers in Australia were protesting against Apple, essentially say, hey, pay me more. But I'd like to hear more. If anyone in Australia knows about this, it's really quite interesting. And I'll be curious if this becomes a widespread movement where, workers, Apple stores all around the world are like, yo, Apple, you don't pay us enough. Again, this is part of inflation. Workers want to get paid more, which is completely understandable. And how on this channel, this is sort of why I do this with you guys, is like, we talk about all news, talk about all issues, and talk freely. I think that's the beauty of this kind of thing. However, that is not a thing everywhere. And in fact, if you guys may or may not know, YouTube is blocked in China. And the reason I'm bringing this up here is President Xi, he's been scaring a lot of tech companies, scaring the markets, because you just don't know which companies are going to lock down next. And as it turns out, there was an interesting report about how even internally, right? So the government controls public information, but even internally, people are afraid to report to their superiors the truth, which is really interesting. So think of it this way. So like say during the COVID situation, the doctor's like, yo, I think we got a problem with COVID. And they might tell other doctors, and the government's like, no, don't tell anybody, don't tell anyone. We don't want to freak anybody out. But think how dangerous that is, especially something like COVID, just for example. And the basic gist of it is like people are afraid to tell their boss that something's wrong. Or another thing that happens in China's media, so not only are people afraid to tell their boss something's wrong, if there is something wrong, the boss will say, oh, well, here's a bunch of money, don't tell anyone. That's a real thing. And this is an example of first I told you COVID is an example of there's a mining accident where a company hurts people and the workers, get severely hurt, and then the company just pays money and makes it go away, that kind of thing. This is sort of how it works in China. And some of the things that they cover up here, they cover up corruption. strikes. So if workers go on strikes, so like the Foxconn thing may not even be reported in mainstream media in China. Anytime that there's any criticism of say President Xi or anyone, they'll cover that up. Any kind of accidents, right, kind of thing. So usually, basically, the way media works in China is if the people in power or company or government does something wrong, they try to hide it from the people. People do know about these things because obviously some bad things happen to people, but I just want you to understand this is something like because I made a video prior about the importance of free media and free press. Yes, it is important. I'm all about freedom. I'm sharing with you guys this stuff now, so don't ever think I'm not about freedom. I'm all about freedom. It's terribly important. And I used to live in China. I can just tell you, freedom of speech, freedom of the press is not a thing there, and it's a real problem. Now, on a positive note for China, we just talked about a slowing economy, talked about Apple struggling there, we talked about the government, basically censorship. However, it turns out that the car companies, which is kind of an interesting one, may be doing pretty well. I was looking at this. This is some charts of exporting, and this is the BYD. Actually, this is the Warren Buffett back one. This I don't know like how good a car. I've never driven one of these things, but it looks cool. I like that one. But I was looking at this, and this is basically showing you that exports of Chinese cars is definitely going up. You guys can see this from what 2003 to 2022. It's a clear chart that it's going up. Also, too, which is really interesting, and so we're transitioning to saying like it's not everything's doom and gloom. The Chinese car companies seem to be growing. This is a chart that basically show you imports and exports from Europe. Basically, I want you to show you here. If you look at the black boxes, you can see it's growing. Black just shows that the China sending cars to Europe is increasing. Also, too, you can see here as well. These are other things that basically show you the same thing. That Chinese cars are exporting to Europe, also to other parts of Asia. They're not really increasing the amounts of Chinese cars to say North America, but I think there's a possibility that could change in the future. You never know. And one thing is that if you can offer a same product, equal quality at lower price, I think people will go for the lower price. Now, companies that are still importing into China, Tesla is still, and talking about EVs here, Tesla is still leading the show. However, Volkswagen, BMW, Mercedes, GM are there. GM is actually a lot smaller, so the Americans don't do that well in China in comparison. I'd say Tesla is, but GM and Ford not so well. I mean, it's Tesla, and then you're competing with like Volkswagen, BMW, Mercedes. Also, too, we talked about this before. I want to share with you guys, and we'll keep tabs on this story. The South Korea Legoland thing keeps getting worse. The basic gist of it is now, if you remember, the South Korea Legoland thing is basically the city said, hey, we'll back you up, build this theme park here. We'll give you a whole bunch of money. The theme park essentially can't pay their bond payments, which is a real problem, so they just aren't making any money. And when the story got out that the government may bail out this foreign company, essentially Legoland, people are like pretty pissed off about it. And what makes the problem worse is now Koreans don't even want to go to this theme park because they're already mad that the theme park basically took taxpayer dollars and now they don't want to go there. And so now the park's even worse condition. And it just could cause a domino effect in the economy. I mentioned this, is like keep an eye on this. I understand that most other people won't talk about it, but I'm telling you guys, this is a legitimate thing, and Korea is not a small economy. Also, too, in Brazil, they have a new leader now. So they had election like it was like a month or so ago, and then they did it was like close, and then doing a runoff, and then was it Lula is the winner. I'm not an expert on Brazil by any stretch of imagination. I took one class on Latin America. I'm not an expert at all, but although my professor was when I was there. But the one thing though that I think is an important issue, and I think this Lula da Silva, I think therefore, in my understanding at least, is actually deforestation is one of the bigger issues in Brazil. Really important because if you're sort of for corporations and you're for making money, et cetera, then you just let companies chop down all the trees that they want in the Amazon. And I'm sure you guys understand this, that the Amazon is actually really important. We can't just cut down every tree down there. And I hope you understand that this is a world issue where we need to keep those trees. So I get the point of where some, governments and / companies want to develop, but I do want to stress that we can't just cut down all the trees. And so I think that's one of the important issue. Fighting poverty and corruption. I don't know if this, president will do anything. I don't know. But I will say that it looks like that the countries are starting to lean more left, meaning help the people more, but at what cost? So that's certainly something that you do want to think about. Also, too, we talked about this before. Putin basically is cutting off the grain exports from Ukraine, goes through the Black Sea, and this is going to affect this into the world food supply. Now it's going to hit the countries in Africa first, so we'll keep tracking this story. I was reading through this, and I wasn't sure who would hit first, but it makes sense because they're the closest to Ukraine and the Black Sea, and the food would go there first, and then also depends how many how much local food that you have, and do keep an eye on this. This is a real thing. Putin's just targeting civilian populations basically by cutting power and food. This was an interesting one. I was actually considering making a full video on this because it's such a fascinating topic. So we have a midterm election coming up, as you guys know, in USA. And sometimes, you get these, polling data, be it from CNN, be it from Fox, right, New York Times, whatever. But as it turns out, the more accurate data, not the polling data, may actually be the gambling market. So people can actually bet on elections. That is a real thing. You can bet on elections. You can bet on, whether or not you think Biden's going to be impeached. Really, seriously, that is a real thing. You can bet on whether or not you think Kamala Harris is going to be president. You can bet on whether or not which party will control the Senate. All these things you can bet on. And it's quite interesting because the government's actually looking into this of like, should this even be legal, right? Should we be allowed to be bet on these things at all? Many times the sites that if you want to bet on American elections, because you can bet on these things, Americans are not allowed to do it, and they're hosted overseas, which is really interesting. And one of the reasons why, and I'm just sharing with you, why would we talk about this stuff? So one is has to do with gambling laws, right? So each state is going to have a different, laws and that kind of thing. And then two, which was something that I was thinking about, is like election influence. So for example, if someone kind of wants to sway the election and these sort of, election gambling markets become a big thing, like what if like foreign governments are like putting a whole bunch of money on, one candidate and trying to like persuade, public perception and that kind of thing. So it's like a way to like manipulate market slash politics by having these, betting on politics things. So it's a really interesting and frankly bizarre story. And in fact, the true story, when I was back in China, this would be my first time. This would be back in 07, 08. I had a friend, he was an economist, and he would always ask me about this because it was actually funny. At this time, I went on Chinese TV, and you guys can find a picture on that if you like. It's easy to find. But I was on Chinese TV talking about elections, and it was funny because my friend at that time was the economist guy. He was like, "Hey, are you going to talk about like political gambling and like prediction of the markets?" And at that time, I was like, "What are you talking about?" But it turned out that my friend was right, and I was the dummy. I should have been on board with this. But yeah, that's a real thing. You can gamble elections, and it turns out that when people vote with their dollars, they're more accurate than just saying, "Hey, put a microphone in someone's face. Who are you going to vote for?" So I thought that was kind of interesting. And this one too is actually the Supreme Court's going to be addressing this. The question is, should race be in college admissions? And this is actually a really important issue. It affects a lot of us. The issue actually, and this, I'll just put it blunt, if race is not a factor, people like myself, Asian Americans benefit. It's just how it is. If race is not a factor, unfortunately, if you're Black American or Latino American, you don't benefit, because the basic idea is that it's harder to find students of the latter categories to be accepted to elite schools. It's a problem. Now, my personal opinion on this one is here's the issue that you're facing is, you want colleges to be fair, you want colleges to be open to any type of candidate, right? And you want to take the best candidate. The issue is that we have an inequality in society where just reality. Some high schools are better than other high schools, right? I'm not even talking about race. Just some high schools are better than other high schools, right? It could be it a rural high school where white people go to school, like for example, West Virginia. It's just not a very good high school compared to say like a high school in New York City that maybe has, a lot of money and affluent families there, right? Richer neighborhood, etc. You're gonna have a better high school. And the issue becomes, what do we do? How do we handle that when there might be students that won't have the grades or the preparation? Like for example, say we'll use the West Virginia example. Maybe at that high school they don't have as many AP classes. There's just not that many options. Whereas say New York City high school has more money. They have like all kinds of AP classes and better teachers and et cetera, et cetera. What do you do? One solution when I was at Tsinghua, it's a top school in China. That's where I used to teach. And what they would do is really interesting. Is they would guarantee that you have to have Chinese students from each state. And so then you have an equal representation of people. Obviously there'll be Americans that figure out a way to abuse that system. Rich people then just buy a second home in Montana or whatever. But I'm just saying that is one thing to think about. Is do we want all the students only come from one state? I used to also work in admissions and financial aid at Brown, so I kind of understand how this process works. And the way the universities say they want to build a class, which I agree with. You want to have a class of people who represent all kinds of different people because in a classroom, it's productive to have people from all walks of life. It's not just race. It's not just race. It's region. It's political thinking, right? You don't want a whole bunch of liberal people in the class. You don't want a whole bunch of conservative people in the class. You want all kinds of people in the class to have healthy discussion. And that's something that I treasure, and I think it's extremely important that we talk to each other. So I don't think this is an easy issue, but I will say that, yeah, if you get rid of race, it helps people like myself. If you don't believe me, you just look at what happened in the California system. Basically, like, say, Berkeley, University of California, or you look at UCLA or anything, when they remove race from the admissions, basically, like, say, at Berkeley, enrollment of, say, Asian American students is like 40% in that nature. Before that, it would be like, so Asians would be the same, but essentially Black Americans, it would be like, well, just for example, it'd be like 8% before when you could consider race, and then when you can't consider race, it would drop down to like from 8 to 4%, right? So basically half, and it'd be the same with Latinos. So it is a real problem. And the other issue too, I just want to mention, because people say, "Oh, no, it shouldn't be excluded." I just want to, have a real conversation about it. Is that it has been known that doesn't have to be Black, but say Native American or a white person from West Virginia. Let's say you're from West Virginia and you're white, for example, and you get accepted to go to Princeton. And it turns out, if you come from a poor family and you go to Princeton and you go back to your town, you have a much larger impact on your community than, say, if you're a rich person from Boston, and you live there and you go to Harvard or whatever. You'll go back and you'll go work with your family who are all bankers, etc. Right? Yes, you might be smart, you might get the grades, but you won't have as big of an impact as, say, a person who goes back to West Virginia and does that. And I can just tell you guys, I did not grow up rich by any stretch of the imagination. And my experiences are really, really different than kids who went to Phillips Exeter or Harvard Westlake, basically really famous private high schools. And it's a tough issue, right? Because going to college, especially at the great places, you have access to people, you have access to ideas, technology, equipment, all kinds of things, and you have the ability to change the world. And I hope we can find a way to utilize the best and the brightest in the country and in the world. So that's my feelings on that. And I just want to emphasize to you guys, it's not that simple cut and dry issue. And I really understand, and I really want to emphasize that education is extremely important, and I want people to all have access to it, regardless of where you live or where you come from. And I also am a beneficiary and recognize the impact that people can have from receiving education and going back to their communities, be it West Virginia, be it Mississippi, be it Alabama, it doesn't matter, be it Texas, right? And making an impact on your community. So hope you guys understand my meaning with that. So anyway, this has been your Daily Uncut News, and I'll catch you in the next video.